While it's expected that residential utility bills may shift from month to month based on usage, there is less appetite among state lawmakers for fluctuations based on estimates from the utilities that end up being wrong and need to be rectified in future bills, causing very large and sometimes cumbersome swings for residential ratepayers. To that end, Assemblymember Jonathan Jacobson, a Hudson Valley Democrat, advanced a bill in 2025 to restrict when estimated bills could be applied by utilities, and while it was ultimately vetoed by the governor, who insisted on directing the state utility regulator to examine the practice of estimating bills, we still wanted to explore that issue as well as one of his bills dealing with the transparency surrounding capital expenditures by utilities. And he joins us in the studio to talk about his past legislative efforts as well as what he has in store for 2026. Assemblymember, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So I'm interested in the variations in bills that consumers have experienced in the past as a result of these bad estimates from utilities, because I've noticed some changes around the margins in my own bill, but based on the force in which you pushed this bill, I have to imagine there are people out there who have seen very wild swings in their bills based on maybe multiple months of estimated payments followed by that final bill where it's based off an actual reading.
Well, we had these problems in the Hudson Valley with Central Hudson. Central Hudson was doing late billing, which a bill is now law that says that if they bill later than 3 months if any utility bills later than 3 months for any period, they cannot bill for that period.
Right.
And then we had large fluctuations because of billing problems. And so what the bill that was vetoed said that they would have to use a reasonable effort to get the results and could not have consecutive estimated billing. And obviously I was disappointed. The governor says she's going to direct the Public Service Commission to do various things, all of which were covered in the bill. So we'll see what she does. And meanwhile, I have other bills which I think will solve other problems.
Well, we're about a month away from that veto, and at this point, have you heard or seen anything about the governor directing the PSC to examine their use of estimated billing by utilities, or is there anything that you're cognizant of that seems to be coming down the pike from the PSC in terms of examining this issue?
No, but we'll see what happens. We've got time.
And one of the things I noticed from the Assembly debate about this issue brought up by your upstate colleague Phil Palmisano was this idea that I think only 0.7% of Central Hudson customers had undergone estimated billing. So is that your understanding of the scope of this issue? And if that is right, was it the case that it was just really bad that in terms of what the 0.7% experience that prompted you to bring up a bill?
Well, when there's problems and you try to solve it, and I had heard from different colleagues of problems throughout the state on this. And so if the utility is not doing estimated billing, making actual readings, then you don't have the problem. And if they say it doesn't exist, fine. Then the new law would not have affected them. So the thing is to have these safeguards in place.
And is there anything that can be done other than mandates to ensure that utilities aren't doing estimated billing? Is there anything that could be done to, say, promote the utilization of smart meters or ensuring that meters are accessible so that they are relying on?
This bill had a definition that a smart meter reading, which most people have for their municipal water systems, would be considered an actual reading. There's some vagaries in the current law and rules and regulations that smart meters are not considered actual reading, which doesn't make any sense. So we tried to correct this, and we didn't. We got through another bill which will have more transparency on capital expenditures that requires the utility to fully disclose for each project included in a request for a rate increase capital expenditures so that each project would we know, so they wouldn't just say, well, this chunk of money is for capital expenditures. It would have to be fully spelled out and on the website of the PSC. So,
And what does fully spelled out mean to you? Because, for example, you could say we're putting up new utility poles. So do you want a accounting of every single utility pole, or can they just say we're doing utility poles in this general area, for example?
well, if they're putting up a new building, if they're putting up new infrastructure such as utility bills, they'd
Hmm.
have to say how much they're doing, where they're doing it, what the benefit to consumers are, and why they think this is the best way to go.
And so, is there an underlying premise of this bill that the utilities have been dishonest or disingenuous about what they're spending on capital?
There hasn't been a full disclosure, and that's important for consumers and consumer advocates to know what's going on.
And in this case, while the governor did sign the bill, it was with an approval memo, so an expectation that there are amendments coming in 2026. Anything significant about those, or do you feel like
It changed nothing.
okay?
It was basically a semantics. It was basically semantics.
So, generally speaking, we've been talking about utilities and sort of their relationship with the Public Service Commission. How do you feel the Public Service Commission is doing as it pertains to their role as a check and balance on the utilities?
Sometimes, depending on the case involved, they do well, and sometimes they don't. And so I think what we need to do is change the rules somewhat. And for example, right now, utilities receive basically a dollar for dollar return on everyday expenses and maintenance. They receive a reasonable rate of return, and that's been defined from 9.5 to 10% on capital expenditures, large capital expenditures. They're all capital expenditures, but what would be considered for infrastructure, for buildings, and so forth. And so, what I have proposed is a bill to change how we calculate what considered a return that the PSC should consider, and that would be based on the 10-year Treasury note plus 1%. So that would be equal to 5.25 at this point, approximately, as we speak, and that would be a great savings for consumers. So that's something I'd really like to see. It would take some time, I think, to have it percolate through, but I think this is something that can get forward.
That number, though, of profit that you've outlined could be described as arbitrary by the utilities. So,
No, it's based because here's what it is. The reason that the utilities claim that they need the higher rate than they get for other expenditures, is that they have borrowing costs, and they have to spend for borrowing costs to be able to do these projects. So since the 10-year Treasury note would be something that they can get loans around that
mhm.
rate, I added 1% to that to round it off. I also have another bill that would let NYSERDA issue special bonds that utilities then could borrow the money from at a cheaper rate than probably they're paying in the private market.
And is this a companion to your other bill that deals with a public utility profit margin being capped at 4%?
Yeah, these are different ways to get around that
Hmm.
and to so forth. I was told that there were some legal matters that we couldn't get the 4%. So I was thinking other ways. So I'm always inventive. I'm always trying to find ways that we can do things better.
And what about the idea of overhauling the utilities themselves and moving away from these either for-profit or non-profit utilities and just switching to a government-run utility option across the state for communities that want that?
It's something that can be considered, but you have to get into the details
Hmm.
because if any entity takes over a utility. It would be same as eminent domain, same as a taking. It would be a taking and the same thing. So you'd have to pay for that. You'd have to pay for everything you're inheriting from a utility company that you're buying, I should say, not inheriting. And so that you have to calculate those expenses. You have to say, well, who's going to run it? LICO has had problems on that in Long Island. They've actually outsourced the day-to-day running of it. And so there's a lot of things that sound good, but I get into the details because if I'm going to advocate something, I want to know that it's going to work.
And coming back to the Public Service Commission and its approach to its oversight work, some of your colleagues have argued essentially that it is a flawed institution to begin with, and we need to overhaul its makeup and its focus. Does that make sense to you? Do we need to essentially clean house and rewrite the rules that they operate by?
Well, you have to change the rules they operate by, because there's always going to be some entity that's going to say this increase is allowed or it's not allowed or this much will be allowed. But that's why I want to change how the rates are determined.
But do you feel like, as an entity, the Public Service Commission is in a place where it's going after the consumer's best interests and not necessarily, as some critics would say, being a rubber stamp for whatever utilities are proposing?
There are sometimes they really do the right job, and sometimes they don't. And so I think the key here is not to go around the edges, but to actually change the rules that they're operating by.
And what about the argument from the utilities that the situation we're in terms of what people are paying is not a product of their business practices, but is a product of rules and regulations that have been foisted upon them by state lawmakers and multiple governors now? Do you have any sympathy for that critique?
No.
Because? Because
the utilities have not been really, in a lot of ways, keeping up to date with their infrastructure as it goes along. And I think that there has to be regulations. Look, they're monopolies. When these utility monopolies were created, it was a trade-off. We're going to say, okay, you're going to be a monopoly. You're going to have to give service to everybody in your territory. And in exchange for that, also, you're going to have to abide by the rules that the state makes, either directly by the legislature or by the Public Service Commission.
But I guess the critique is that they have been given so many rules, so many mandates, so many hoops that they have to jump through, that's what's driving a lot of the costs and not necessarily the work that they are doing on a day-to-day basis to give people their power.
Well, I don't buy that.
Well, on that concise note, we've been speaking with Assemblymember Jonathan Jacobson. He is a Hudson Valley Democrat. Assemblymember, thanks for visiting us in the studio. I really appreciate it.
All right. Very good.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.